Okay.
All right, thank you. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Audit Committee, which is being held fully remotely. The meeting is being held in accordance with the emergency legislation that enables the Council to hold Council meetings remotely alongside the Council's constitution and ensures that the Council can continue to operate and make democratic decisions in an open and transparent way. I would like to remind members that this meeting is being live streamed to the public, and can I request that you all switch off your cameras and mute your microphones when you are not speaking directly to the committee to ensure there is no unnecessary background noise. All sections of the Members' Code of Conduct still apply to members in this virtual meeting environment and are as applicable now as they are in a traditional meeting setting. Can I also remind members to ensure the chat function is switched on. Should they wish to speak on a particular item, a raise your hand facility will appear in the chat. Please indicate your request to speak there, and I will invite you to speak at the relevant point in the meeting, where you would then unmute your microphone and switch your camera back on. I would like to make it clear that any decision made in this fully remote meeting should be considered the same as any other decision of the Audit Committee. Provided that the meeting remains quorate and meets its legislative requirement to make a decision, regardless of whether a member of this meeting is unable to cast their vote due to technical issues, the decision of the committee will remain valid. For the purposes of everyone participating in the meeting and watching on the live stream, councillors in attendance today are Councillor Higginson, Councillor Lane, Councillor Eason, Councillor Murphy, Councillor Smith and Councillor Strong. Those are the ones I've seen on the stream. If anyone else is here, perhaps they could put something into the chat bar. But that's who I've got in attendance. I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Feekins. If there are any other apologies that need to be recorded, please make this clear in the chat and they will be recorded in the minutes. So I'm going to move on to the agenda now. The first item on the agenda, of course, was apologies for absence, which I've dealt with. The second item is declarations of interest. If a member wants to indicate an expression of interest in the chat, please do that. And the chair will ask the member to speak to explain the nature of the interest. If prejudicial, the member will leave the meeting and Democratic Services will advise the member when to rejoin the meeting. I'll move on then to the next agenda item, which is the public open forum. Members of the public wishing to participate would have had to have notified their intention in advance of this meeting. I've got no notice of any member of the public joining this meeting. So the next item on the agenda then is the action list from the previous meeting. So we're now on item 4. Now what I see is that the items performance management for Peter Davis, who is of course Chief Officer Resources, unfavourable audit opinions, that's Andrew Wathen, who's the Chief Internal Auditor, and the item which is Audit Committee Self-Assessment, which is also for Andrew Wathen. These are all items which have been suggested for future meetings without committed dates, generally for good reasons. I would like to simply say, unless there are objections, that they have been noted without asking for any contributions from officers at this stage. However, if we look at the whole authority strategic risk assessment, I believe this to be covered at item 9 on the agenda. We were promised a separate interim report, and that I think is what item 9 is. So if I'm correct on that. The next thing I might draw attention to is the annual review of the investment committee. I'm not sure, does Peter Davis have a contribution he wishes to make at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Just simply to highlight that on March the 19th, the Audit Committee received the annual review of the Investment Committee. It's a review of its performance. And on an annual cycle, I'd anticipate the next annual review to be coming back into Audit Committee early next year, next calendar year. So I just wanted to just make that point known, just for the committee's expectation and for it to feature obviously on the work programme accordingly.
Thank you for that. I'll just then move on to the final one that I wanted to mention, the action on the draft statement of accounts, which is for Jonathan Davis, who's finance manager. I understand that these are changes that need to be made to the statements of accounts either immediately or in future years. Is that right, Mr. Davis?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair. Yes, I think there were a couple of points raised in the June meeting, which we said we would take account of during the audit process as we move through to September, potentially either adjust the accounts for 2019-20 or look to make improvements to those in 2020-21.
Right, thank you for that. Now, does anyone in the meeting wish to make any comments or ask any questions about any of those action points before I move on? Right, I'm not seeing anything now. So I'll move on to the next item on the agenda then, which is the draft statement of accounts for charitable trust funds. So I'm going to ask Jonathan Davis, the finance manager, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, the reported item 5 for the statement of accounts sets out the draft financial statements for the various bodies where Monmouthshire has sole or custodian trustee responsibilities. The due process for these financial statements varies from each of the funds. So the Welsh Church Fund statements will have a formal audit by Audit Wales, and subsequently they will come back to this committee at its November meeting. The Monmouthshire Farms School Endowment Trust will have an independent examination due to the size of the fund. That will also be by Audit Wales, and it will then be considered by the trustees before the accounts are lodged with the Charities Commission. And then finally, the report touches on the Llanelli Hills statement of accounts, which will not require a formal audit or inspection due to its small size, and they will subsequently be lodged with the Charities Commission by the required date at the end of January. Chair, I wasn't intending going through the detailed financial statements here today, so would welcome any questions on the accounts or the report itself.
In that case, then I'll just ask members of the committee whether they have any questions or have any other observations that they wish to make about the charitable trust funds.
I've got just a comment, Chair, if I could come in.
Yes, of course.
There's no hand raising in the chat bar for that, so I had to break in. No, everything's absolutely fine. It's just that on page 7 of the report, or page 31 of the bundle, there's a typo. And it's it says the financial were approved. It shouldn't be that, should it? I can't find it now. I'm looking at this on a different computer. It's taken ages to get to it. Oh, here we are. Yes, it's the balance sheet of the 31st of March, and right at the end, before it says trustee and the date, it just says the financial were approved, and it you know, there's obviously a word missing there.
Perhaps you could just send a note to Mr. Davis about the specific point there, please, Councillor Murphy.
Okay, have you picked that up, Jonathan?
Yeah, I can see the paragraph you're alluding to, so that's fine. I'll pick that up during the audit process for the fund and make sure that's adjusted as appropriate.
Sorry. Yeah, but as I say, I know that sounds trivial, but it's the only thing I could find to comment on in the accounts.
Right, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Chairman, may I please?
Yes, Councillor Smith.
It was on the Monmouthshire County Council, the Welsh Church Act Fund. And again, page 7, I was intrigued as to why there were 2 columns for 2020. So it's actually page 13 of the hard copy bundle, page 7 of the Welsh Church Act Fund. And they have 2 identical columns. I'm not an accountant, there might be some good reason, but I can't think what it is. It's for the year 2020. It's a duplicate one.
Mr. Davis, it's page 7 of the paper.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I think this is probably a hangover from when previous years required us to split out the fund into restricted and unrestricted. So I think the councillor is absolutely right there that we need some adjustment to that page, just to make it remove one of the columns and correct it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, do we have any other comments or observations on the paper?
Oh, Chairman, if I may.
Councillor Smith, do you want us to say something?
Yes, I think it was the end of the church fund that I noticed that the audit fees had gone up considerably. I can't find that page. I think it was the Welsh Church Fund. Must be more methodical. I think it's something like a £500 increase in the audit fees, and they were about 6,000 or 5,000 something. And I wonder what the justification was.
Is anyone able to show any light on that? I think,
Chair, if I could butt in, that the Wales Audit Office fees have gone up 3%. And they were going to try and, through efficiency, keep them at the same level, but they did go up 3%, so that's probably got some bearing on it.
It now, Chairman, and it was page 18, and again it's the Welsh Church Act Fund, and it was the governance costs, which had gone up from 5,880 to 6,349, and that's different to audit, isn't it, Phil? I don't know. I just thought, oh, so thank you.
Chair, I'm happy to come in and respond to that, if that's okay.
Yes, sure.
Yes, yeah. Effectively, the costs that are recorded there are the actual costs of delivering the audit. We're presenting our audit plan now as the next item, which will set out the estimated audit fee for this year's audit as well, which should be broadly in line with that £6,300 there. Ultimately, it just reflects the actual cost of delivering the audit. So if particular issues arise, then we do just need to respond to that. And unfortunately, on a smaller audit, sometimes those issues reflect themselves with a fairly sizable increase in percentage terms, but only £500 in real terms. So I hope that sort of sets it out anyway.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lucy, from Wales Audit. I'll just note then that the recommendation is that the draft statements of accounts for 1920 for the 3 charitable trust funds should be reviewed. I'd like it to be recorded in the minutes that the committee has indeed reviewed the draft statement of accounts. I'll move on to the next item then, which is the audit plan for the Welsh Church accounts. This is an Audit Wales paper, and it's to be presented by Mr. Lucy from Audit Wales.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, and good afternoon, members as well. This is our audit plan for the audit of the Monmouthshire County Council Welsh Church Act Fund. And just to give a little bit of context, because in some ways this will be a new report for the committee this year that you won't have seen in prior years. So just to explain sort of how this has come about. So as has been explained by Jonathan in the previous item, so we are responsible for reviewing the Welsh Church Act Fund and the Farm School Endowment Trust Fund accounts. And due to their relevant sizes, we carry out a full audit over the Welsh Church Act Fund and a independent examination over the Farm School Endowment Trust Fund, just because it's a slightly smaller size. And that's due to regulations set out by the Charity Commissions. They set out the level of work that's required in each instance. So in this case, we carry out a full audit, and whenever we carry out a full audit, we present an audit plan to those charged with governance, so the audit committee in the case of the council. So we're required to do that for each audit that we undertake. In previous years, we've encapsulated that within the overall audit plan that we present to the council. So as we presented to the council in March, in previous years, we've used that to cover the audit of the Welsh Church Act Fund as well. But just this year, we've decided, just for clarity, we think it's better just to present a separate audit plan for a separate audit, as it is a separate set of financial statements. So just to explain how that's come about this year, and those of you who've been around in previous years won't have seen this specifically before. In terms of the content of the plan, it's hopefully all relatively straightforward, and hopefully members have had a chance to read through it. It just sets out some of the key details of the audit that we're required under auditing standards to present to you. So areas such as details of the team, details of the timings of the audit, and as previously discussed, the estimated fee at this stage, although of course the only fee that will be charged will be the actual cost of delivering the audit in line with legislation. At this stage, we don't really foresee any particular significant risks that we need to bring to the committee's attention in carrying out that work. We flag up in the plan the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic and how that's affecting how we carry out our audit work. But at this stage, we don't foresee it as a significant risk to delivery of the work. And our aim is to carry out this work over the early autumn of 2020, well in time then for filing accounts under Charity Commission deadlines by the end of January. So that's just a quick overall summary, really, Chair, but again, happy to take any questions that members have.
Well, thank you for that. It's always good to get a contribution from Audit Wales. I just wondered whether the finance manager, Jonathan Davis, has anything to add at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing in particular. I'm happy that this follows due process for highlighting the audit of the trust funds, and we're happy with the content of the plan that's been put forward by Audit Wales. Got nothing further.
Thank you. Well, I'll throw this open then to the committee. If anyone wants to ask any questions or make any observations, please indicate. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. All I was going to say was this is basically a report for information. It follows the patterns from before. I've got no problem with it. I suggest we note it and move on.
Well, I'm happy to do that unless anyone else wants to make an intervention at this point. In that case, let's minute that we note it, but very grateful to receive the plan from Audit Wales. Now, the next item on the agenda is the Audit Committee annual report. Now, the way drafted, the way the recommendation has been drafted on this report, it's for the council to consider. So, as the author, what I'm seeking now is an indication from the committee that the report is fit for purpose. Just to swiftly say, the report aims to provide examples that the committee is ensuring that there are procedures in place to guarantee the adequacy and effectiveness of financial control and corporate governance arrangements. The report is crouched in terms of meeting the terms of reference the committee has been given, and by doing so show how the committee's responsibilities have been addressed. Now, I know that there is at least one small typo in the report, in that the date on the table is wrong. That correction has been pointed out to me. I think there may be one or two other small typos which we'll correct before we pass it on to council. But at this point, I'd just like to leave it open to the committee for questions and observations. Please indicate if you wish to speak. Councillor Eason.
Right. Whose phone is that?
That's my phone.
Oh, right.
It's the house phone.
Yeah, right. I was a little concerned to see the attendance of meetings of councillors has been declining over the last 12 months. Really, it's just a comment on that. In one meeting, there were 4 members there, which is barely quorate, when we got 11 or 12 members on the committee. So I'm a little concerned that members are not showing the due regard to audit as it stands. I think we should be attending more. Just a comment, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. The number of people attending on the 19th of March, this was just pretty much about the time that the lockdown was starting. So yeah. I was a bit surprised we were quorate at all for that meeting.
Yes, Chair.
Well, we need to keep an eye on this. I think attendance at audit historically has been fairly good.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you've noticed a trend, then we'll need to keep an eye on it.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Anyone else wish to make a comment?
If I could come in.
Oh, yes, I've got the list. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, I think it's been indicative of things for a while over most of the scrutiny committees as well. There's one thing particularly noticeable about the present arrangements with remote meetings. Attendance has gone up substantially, so let's hope it continues.
Councillor Smith.
It does. It's going to let me speak. Yes. Once I'm connected, no, Phil, I find this personally, this takes a lot of stress and strain off me once I'm connected, Chairman. It's making my life a little easier. I wanted to say thank you for your report, and I thought it covered well. That one meeting, I think I must have been there because I remember being astounded at it was well attended by officers. But thank you very much for your composition, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other contributions or observations that any of the committee members would like to make? Well, if not, I would like this report, once we've made the small changes we need to make, to be presented to the council at some future opportunity. So thank you all very much. The next item on the agenda is the Treasury outturn statement for the Finance Manager Jonathan Davis to present.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the Treasury Outturn report in front of you outlines the Treasury performance during the 2019-20 financial year, and the balance is held both for borrowing and investments at the 31st of March 2020. This follows the mid-year report that was presented to the November 2019 Audit Committee. Chair, just going to check everyone can hear me okay, because I'm getting a message here that there's poor quality.
You're fine for me.
And me.
And me.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the Treasury Management Strategy for 2019-20 was approved by Council in March 2019, and that set out the limits and parameters that the authority had to adhere to during the year. This document shows the progress against these limits and parameters that were set. The first point I note to note really is that this 2019-20 was an exceptional year in terms of financial markets, and especially with the both the progression towards a Brexit agreement in the autumn, and also towards the year end, the impact of COVID-19. COVID-19 and the authorities' financial response to those events significantly impacted the balances that you'll see in this report, in so much that the balances reported were at the peak of uncertainty surrounding the pandemic. So at the 31st of March 2020, there was great uncertainty around future expenditure and the funding required, and the funding that we would receive from Welsh Government to cover some of that expenditure. So as a result, there were significant amounts of borrowing taken towards the end of the financial year. And Table 1 in the report will show that the balance reported at the end of the year was 186.9 million. This was significantly higher than at any point during the financial year and since. And just for example, as of today, our external borrowing stands at around 155 million, which is significantly less. It's important to note that we have the flexibility built into our Treasury strategy to deal with these unexpected events. And as such, the authority has still complied with the limits and the parameters that were set for the start of the year in the strategy. Investments within the report show an increase of 7.3 million. And again, this is primarily due to the authority's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as I mentioned, where we borrowed more towards the end of the financial year, that has a direct result on direct impact on investments, because those balances that we borrowed need to be invested prior to us having expenditure going out. The other significant point to note within the report is in paragraph 3.7, and it outlines the performance of the authority's external pooled funds. These have incurred a negative capital return as at the 31st of March 2020, alongside a positive income return. It results in an overall negative return of 5.31% on these funds. But it's important to note that as of today, there's been significant recovery in those capital values. And that capital value that's reported in the Treasury Outturn report was very much at the height of the uncertainty in the financial markets. Alongside that, regulations do permit us to hold the loss that was incurred on the balance sheet, and it would not have impacted the council fund as at the 31st of March 2020. That loss would only materialise when the investment was sold, and that investment was taken out with a medium-term view in mind. The final point to note on the report is that the authority has complied with the CIPFA Code of Practice and its own treasury management strategy that was set at the start of the year. There are no compliance issues to report to this committee. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions on the report itself.
Okay, well, I will ask now for people to indicate if they want to speak or ask questions. I will just note the recommendation, which is that members note the results of the Treasury management activities and the performance achieved in 29-20 as part of the delegated responsibility to provide scrutiny of Treasury policy, strategy and activity on behalf of the Council. So, Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And two questions, Jonathan. First one is in relation to the amount of borrowing that we may or may not be having to incur as a result of the delays in getting reimbursement from Welsh Government. That's very substantial at the moment and an ongoing problem. So just something about how we're coping with that. And the other thing is on the other side, PWLB, the rates are historically high with them now. Just something about how we're coping with that and what alternatives we're finding.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of the first question, Councillor, the delays in reimbursement from Welsh Government were very much felt over the year-end period. So at the 31st of March, yes, we had a significant amount of expenditure which we'd incurred that we were still waiting for funding for. Our response to that, and still is to take short-term borrowing, which allows us to mitigate those risks and allows our cash flow to continue without any issues. It's also important to note that we have claimed those short-term borrowing costs in terms of the interest payable from the hardship fund with the Welsh Government, so those costs would not be met by the authority. In terms of the second question around PWLB rates, yes, you're quite correct in terms of there being a premium currently over and above gilt rates. So PWLB borrowing at the moment would be comparatively higher than previously. What was pleasing to note is that we did take some significant amounts of borrowing prior to that hike in rates. It was around 10 million of medium-term borrowing, which is outlined in the report. That allowed us to bring some stability to the portfolio and doesn't expose us to short-term fluctuations in these rates. The only further point to note is that there are alternatives to PWLB borrowing, and we do borrow significant amounts from other local authorities and public bodies at significantly lower rates. So that has been the approach that we've taken over the past 12 months or so to mitigate those high risks from the PWLB.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. Councillor Smith, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, please. The Lobo loans, 8.7, that point about Lobo loans, that was a large sum of money that we agreed, what was it, 30 million or something. When it says that the authority continues to hold, we've spent some of that money, we've invested. The residue that stays with us, does it cost us to actually hold on to it? That was one question, as regarding sort of the remnants of the Lobo loans. Are we having to pay to hold on to? And then I like the definition in 9.9 of investments. It's broad, but it's mildly, isn't it? And point 10.5, where it refers to the investments generated approximately 2.58 million of investment. Is that the total from the points above, 10.3 and 10.4? Get a bit muddled. Must be useful to be an accountant, Phil. All right, Pete.
I'll hand it over to Mr. Davis to respond. Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll go back to the first question, which was regarding the Lobo loans balance, the 13.6 million. So these were market loans that were taken out, I think around 2001, with a 40-year maturity. And these were taken out at a time when rates were slightly higher in terms of bank rate, and they were taken out with obviously a long-term view in mind, being over 40 years. So we continue to pay interest on these, and I think the rate is shown as 4.8% average rate in Table 3, and it does fit into our overall borrowing portfolio quite well. In so much that at the time it was taken, it was a reasonable rate to pay on the loans. So to answer the question succinctly, yes, we continue to pay an average interest rate of 4.8% on that balance of 13.6 million.
Right. And the other question was regarding 10.5, whether it was a combination of the point on 10.3 and 10.4, and that what you've just described to me now. I would really benefit from some tutorials, Chairman, because I'd confuse that with some other substantial borrowing that we had or grants that were available if we wanted and we took up, and we've expended on the Newport purchase and oh yes, the Mitel. I need to get myself in order, Chairman.
I don't know whether Jonathan Davis has got anything he wants to contribute on 10.5.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the return stated of 2.58 million is the income receivable from all those items listed above in 10.3 and 10.4. So
right. That's fine. Thank you very much. That's okay. Fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah.
But I note, Councillor Smith, your comments about the need for tutorials and education in regard to many of these matters, and I think that we're looking into it as part of the action plan that came out of the self-assessment that we had at our last meeting. So we'll see what comes out of that in terms of what we might be able to do for committee members. Does anyone else want to ask any questions or raise any points about the Treasury Outturn report? If not, I'd say thank you, Mr. Davis. And we'll just minute that the committee has noted the results of the Treasury management activities as recommended. So thank you very much. I'll move on then to the strategic risk register, which is an item that is going to be introduced by, I believe it's going to be Emma Davis, and perhaps who's the performance officer, and possibly Richard Jones, who's the performance manager.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. If it's okay with you, Chair, I'll start off providing the committee with a brief overview of the arrangements, then hand over to my colleague Emma Davis, who will provide you with a brief overview of some of the updates that have been made to the strategic risk register. So the report in front of you today is an additional report to Audit Committee to provide you with the Council's latest strategic risk register, which includes the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on strategic risks facing the Council, as well as providing the committee with an overview of the arrangements the Council has in place to manage risk through the coronavirus pandemic. And as you mentioned earlier, Chair, this is an additional report to the meeting, which is in response to the action agreed at your last meeting. As you review the report, it's important to remember your role in risk management arrangements as an audit committee. You have a specific role in providing independent assurance of the adequacy of the Council's risk management framework and risk of management arrangements. It's also important, and it's also an important part of the authority's governance arrangements, which obviously, as well as an important part of the work you oversee as an audit committee. An important report you received to facilitate this role is the regular strategic risk register update report, which obviously we have brought forward you today as an interim report reflecting the coronavirus pandemic. And therefore, I'd encourage you to use the risk assessment to consider the effectiveness of the authority's risk management arrangements and the extent to which the strategic risks facing the authority are appropriately captured. While the impact of the pandemic on strategic risks at the moment is obviously a particular focus of the committee, it is also important within your role you consider the whole range of risks and issues facing the Council. So I'd ask you to consider it across the whole broader range of risks that are on that register. In terms of other committees that have received reports on risk, it's important to update the committee that Cabinet yesterday received an update on the risk arrangements the Council has in place during the coronavirus pandemic. And also the Public Services Select Committee on Monday similarly received an update report. And both of these, both Cabinet and that committee were provided with an overview of the coronavirus related risk updates to the strategic risk register as part of that, part of those meetings. Following scrutiny of this at the Public Services Select Committee, it was suggested that the post-mitigation risk level for risk 1 on the risk register for this current year is raised from low to medium, reflecting the current uncertainty at this time. So it's just an example there of the scrutiny already undertaken, which obviously has made a slight change to the risk report presented to you today. So in terms of the arrangements the Council currently has in place, obviously the coronavirus pandemic has posed a significant and unprecedented challenge to our way of life and how the Council continues to provide a range of vital services. The Council continues to operate in a dynamic environment, managing and mitigating as far as possible a variety of risks to service delivery and the well-being of our staff and residents. To deliver and coordinate the Council's immediate response to the pandemic, it enacted its emergency management plan and business continuity arrangements, working across Council services, along with external partners such as the emergency services, neighbouring local authorities and Welsh Government. As part of these arrangements, the Council established an emergency response team, which was guided by an established risk register that identified a range of risks owned across a variety of Council services, specifically related to the COVID-19 response, to ensure as far as possible risk reduction and risk management. As the Council has progressed through its immediate response phase, the Council's emergency response team was formally stood down, and the Council's strategic leadership team took on the ongoing responsibility to oversee the continuing response. A COVID-19 coordinating group has now also been established, and the role of which is set out within point 3.5 of the report. Some of the particularly important arrangements that remain currently in place to manage ongoing risks related to the pandemic are set out within point 3.6 of the report. Just to highlight those in particular, there's a COVID-19 related risks. COVID-19 related risks are being assessed by the COVID-19 coordinating group, are reported into, considered and acted upon by the strategic leadership team where required. Alongside this, strategic leadership team also undertakes an ongoing review of the whole authority strategic risk assessment, which I'll attach to your papers today. The Council's coronavirus transition strategy sets out the Council's plans to rebuild community confidence. Activity being undertaken to deliver the strategic aims set within this strategy will further identify activity that is being undertaken, which will contribute to managing and mitigating as far as possible related risks. There's continued links with external responding partner organisations via the Gwent Strategic Coordinating Group. And this group are responsible for setting the strategic objectives and coordination of partner agency response to COVID-19. And work is being undertaken with partner organisations as part of the Gwent COVID-19 Recovery Coordinating Group. Service provision has begun to resume, and the Council's response is transitioning out of the first wave to focus on supporting the rebuilding of community and business confidence, whilst clearly recognising that coronavirus remains an active threat. Risks that remain continue to be managed in line with the Council's established risk management policy, which includes the strategic risk assessment, and further arrangements are set out within point 3.2 of the report, and those which I've just described earlier. The strategic risk assessment is one important part of the Council's risk management arrangements. An overview and the full register is attached to the report, and I'll hand over to my colleague Emma Davis, who will run through briefly some of the updates that have been undertaken on the register, in particular since you last received the report at the committee, which was in February.
Hello, thanks Rich. Good afternoon all. As you will no doubt see, this is a considerable document. It is detailed, and considering the current situation, has undergone quite an extensive update to incorporate all the activity currently underway to mitigate the risks that we have in the register. For this purpose, to ease navigation through it, there's a summary table in Appendix 1 of your report. This outlines the risks and also the pre and post mitigation levels. The most significant change since the last update that we brought to you is the addition of 4 new risks. Excuse me. In summary, these include the impact of the virus on the health of staff and residents, and the potential delays or reductions that this could cause in service delivery. The risk of COVID-19 on care homes, which could potentially affect some of our most vulnerable residents. The potential considerable impact of the virus on businesses in our county and also jobs, and the subsequent impact on the economy in Monmouthshire and also the financial situation of some of our residents. And finally, the potential disproportionately negative impact on the well-being of some sections of our communities, which could result in increased poverty and inequality. As it stands today, there have been no removal of risks since your last update. Where necessary, updates have been made to the existing risks, which include the reason why the risk has been identified, the assessed risk level, mitigating actions being undertaken, and also the progress that has been made towards achieving these actions. Some of the more significant changes include updates associated with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, the impact of the flooding that we saw in our county earlier this year, and also the outcome of the Eston inspection, which was carried out in February of this year. It is worth highlighting at this point that the risk assessment covers high and medium level strategic risks. Lower level or operational risks are not added to the register unless it is projected that they will escalate within the 3 years that are to be covered. These risks are managed and monitored through other arrangements, which Rich has already touched upon. The risk register has always been a live document and therefore is dynamic in nature. And this is particularly relevant in the current climate when the situation is changing rapidly to adapt to the local and national direction that's being set. To this end, it is worth remembering that the information contained in the register today was correct at the time that the agenda was circulated to you, but this will continue to be monitored and updated as the situation progresses and potentially alters going forward. The register focuses on the medium-term risks to the organisation, and work is ongoing to further develop arrangements to address the longer-term risks to the county in line with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And where applicable, this work will feed into the strategic risk register as applicable. Finally, it's just worth noting as we transition to the next phase of our response to the pandemic, a revised purpose has been established along with associated strategic aims. The activity that's undertaken to meet these aims will continue to be reviewed, and the impact on the mitigating actions against our risks will be monitored So to this end, the register will remain live and dynamic, and indeed will shift in line with our response as we go forward. Thank you very much. Open to questions should you have any.
Thank you very much, Emma and Richard. I'll just note the recommendations in your covering report. Members use a risk assessment to consider the effectiveness of the authority's risk management arrangements and the extent to which the strategic risks facing the authority are appropriately captured, and that members scrutinise on an ongoing basis the risk assessment and responsibility holders to ensure that risk is appropriately managed. So I'm asking now for comments and observations from members of the committee, and I have a request from Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Richard, for your report. We've had a roller coaster year, really. We had the flooding, which is the first time you mentioned flooding in this report when you gave your verbal update a second ago. Now we've got coronavirus. There are 4 new risks shown for the coronavirus, and they're likely to roll on into 21, 22, maybe into 23. But I go back to risk number 11. Potential risk of political, legislative and financial uncertainty for council services and local businesses as a result of the UK leaving the European Union. You consider that to be high risk, and so do I. But as a result of the flooding, now the coronavirus, which is taking a lot of priorities, where are we as an authority in being able to mitigate that risk by the end of this particular year, not the calendar year, rather than the financial year, and with the uncertainty of not quite knowing whether we'll have a deal or no deal or whatever. So that risk is high. It'll likely remain high for a while, but what can you add to point 11 that I've spoken about?
Anything from Richard or Emma on that?
Chair, I don't know if Peter Davis wants to come in as well, but I'll probably just, in terms of answering Councillor Easton's question initially, I think obviously in terms of what we're doing in response, the risk register sets out those mitigating actions that are currently in place and continue to be worked upon at the present time. So in terms of what we're doing to further understand and coordinate our preparations for the Council's Brexit working group, and there's an update on the register there, obviously the impacts that may have and how we're planning for that for our medium-term financial plan, and also our continued liaison with partners such as Welsh Government and WLGA. So the risk continues to be updated as evidence comes to light, and hopefully the update in the register there provides you with an update on the progress with some of those mitigating actions the Council continues to undertake. I don't know if Peter may want to add anything further, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chair members. Yeah, just to comment, I had the benefit at our leadership team meeting this morning with receiving an update as the Brexit working group met yesterday. And whilst clearly, as Councillor Eason alludes to, a lot of the focus clearly of late and rightly has been on COVID response, we cannot and should not forget Brexit and the consequences of leaving the European Union, and thus, as Richard said, the reason why it's in the risk register. I guess risks that have previously been identified in terms of sub-level risks are and still remain around matters of supply chains, supply chain issues, procurement, food supply, which were ones that were again brought up in the group discussions yesterday, and clearly, and as we know, Brexit could exacerbate some of those issues. And I guess if we draw a parallel with COVID, obviously we're managing our way out of first wave, and I guess we prepare ourselves for what might come in the coming months. But obviously with significant vaccine rollouts, the potential for a second wave and further requirements around medical supply, PPE issues, etc., that clearly presents further issues. So I think, as Richard has always alluded to, and Emma, the strategic risk register is an iterative document. And as was touched on in the update that I received this morning, there are risks that have slightly shifted, I guess, as a consequence of what's currently playing out with COVID. And I guess as negotiations start to escalate and ramp now between UK government and the European Union. They have a further meeting now in September and October, things are going to be closely tracked. Welsh Government has its own preparedness board in place, and we are in regular and constant discussion with them. And I think the final point to make really just is in terms of the emergency structures that have been stood up to respond to COVID. So the Gwent-wide strategic coordinating group, which is made up of all the various partners, Blue Light Services, Public Health Wales, NHS, local authorities, etc. They are assessing obviously COVID-related risks and clearly the issues of Brexit and the risks that I talked to around, for example, supply chain and supply issues. Those will certainly be further assessed and be very actively monitored as we make our way through the coming months. So, Chair, Councillor Rees, and I hope that is helpful to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No doubt we'll revisit this before the end of the year. Thank you.
Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And coming back to the point that was made about risk one, raising it after mitigation from low to medium, I think it certainly needs to be up to medium, possibly a bit higher. Because if you think in terms of the amount of recompense we had from Welsh Government on the flooding, we put in a claim for 307,000 and got 7,000. We're not going to get all of the money back that we've been obliged to spend with regards to COVID. So there are very considerable risks there. So I would certainly agree with the raising of the risk level on risk one.
Right, thank you for that. Do we have anyone else who wishes to ask any questions or make any comments, and any officers present who want to make a further contribution? I don't have anyone else wanting to speak at the moment. So I think it would be appropriate then just to note the recommendations in the paper and minute accordingly. The next item on the agenda is the forward work planner. It's already been pointed out to me that there is an issue with the dates right at the start of the forward work planner. In that it implies that there will be a meeting, I think, on the 3rd of September, where in actual fact it should have been on the 9th. So the forward planner is there. It's just really a matter of whether people think there should be anything added to it at this stage, or any further comments to make. Mr. Davis, Peter Davis.
Thank you, Chair. As I raised my hand and then tried to take it down, and it has been raised twice, so please ignore my hand.
I thought you were getting impatient. Well, it's always nice to see the forward work planner fully inhabited by what's coming up. It's always nice to know what's on the future agendas. Right, well, I'll move on to the next item then, which is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Don't know if anybody wants to speak to this item.
Happy to move, Chair.
I'm happy to accept a proposal to move, and a seconder, please.
I'll second that, Chair.
Okay, we've got that. Right, thanks for that. So we've accepted the minutes of the previous meeting. And I'll just confirm the date of the next meeting of the Audit Committee will be on Wednesday the 9th of September at 2 o'clock. And I'd like to thank everyone for participating in this meeting and the people working away in the background to make sure it all went smoothly. So thank you all very much. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Thank